We're back with Doctors Revord and Tom Molnar. Dr. Molnar is from Rutgers University, and Dr. Revord is from here at MU as the director of Center of Agroforestry. Now, we've been talking about hazelnuts. Let's take it. Hey, I'm excited. I want to grow some hazelnuts here in Missouri. What do I do?
What's your soil series? Is usually
that's good.
The first question we ask you.
Well, let's make it a little tougher.
Okay.
You know, the mint fro, I think, where you're growing some of yours on, very well drained. But you know, a lot of our soils aren't as well drained.
We've been doing some suitability mapping. I don't know if you've had the chance to meet Brian Weber yet, who came back with us from Oregon State in January. We have, I think it's north of 1 million acres of upland river hills soils that are not in forest.
We have that much.
And most of it is just pasture.
Really?
Yeah, I will.
Because it's highly eroded, isn't it? It's probably rolling.
Yeah. So some of the slopes can be tall, but for small scale tree nut production, it's still appropriate. So I'll put that as a qualifier out there, and we'll share some maps with you at a later date. If you're really not well drained, maybe you should consider a different tree nut. So pecan, eastern black walnut, the good options, especially if you're in the floodplain, then really leaning towards pecan. But, you know, while chestnut is like our really strict, don't get the feet wet, stay on the ridge top, hazelnut, you know, and Tom can put his bend on this too. Hazelnut, you might be able to start getting off the ridge tops. What we really need as far as research infrastructure is replicated production trials that get into different soil series. So we're starting to look at that now. We'll put one down at the Southwest Research Center near Mount Vernon this winter with Andy Thomas and Jay Chisholm. But even if it isn't well drained, it still probably needs to be, you know, moderately well drained, not poorly drained for hazelnut.
So if we were on rolling hills that has a clay pad, we'd be okay, probably.
Depends on the depth of the clay pan, right? So probably, I think another drainage is an important question. And secondarily, we try to make like 50 centimeters of depth to restrictive layer a second yes-no threshold.
That's 20 inches.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. You know, the greater that depth, the more volume you have for, you know, root materials.
Sure.
You know, you might not see cost of production until you get into the mature bearing years. But
well, we could look at if it grew good corn and soybeans, or if it grew great forages, it should grow decent hazelnuts. If
the depth and drainage is good enough.
Right.
Yeah. Because there's some really great, like Pershing soils, right? They're great. Great for row crops, but the restrictive layer might be 30 centimeters in those soils. But variably across that block of Pershing you have, it could be 50 centimeters, could be 30 centimeters. It's something you want to look into before making the investment.
So site selection is really good. All right. Because where Tom is, that soil was still some of a sandy loam, wasn't it?
We definitely have a lot of sandy loam soils, and our farm is primarily sandy loam. But we do have growers in New Jersey who have heavier soils, and some of them are trying hazelnuts. And what we see is there's a couple things. On the slower draining or heavier soils, problems come up that don't otherwise come up with hazelnuts, that sometimes can be classified as like root rot diseases or Phytophthora, but other times it's just really poor growth that's hard to characterize. So what we're really seeing is on those less than ideal soils, you have other challenges. You have more tree death, and you have other minor diseases that maybe become more fatal to trees. And then later, I think Ron mentioned this, is when you get into the major production years, as you get into like year 7, 8, 9, 10, that's when you might start to see the real impacts of the more poor soil types or the poorly drained, when the tree's really requiring a lot of inputs from the soil. Then you'll see more biannual bearing or just reduced crop yields, or even like increased tree stress. So it could look good for a while, especially if you say the depth of the soil is shallow before you get to a restrictive layer. It's really when you get into the production years, and then maybe you have drought on top of that, then you'll start to see problems. So we try to lead with site selection because it's a long-term investment.
Right. So if you do it on a shallow soil, you're gonna be disappointed.
Most likely.
All right. Yeah. But you said there's 1 million acres of this well-drained deep soil.
North of 1 million. And now there might be some bottomland areas that are suited to hazelnut, but it'll be the pockets that happen to also be well-draining. So it won't be... So are you familiar with the River Center, the new demonstration that we have in partnership with the Nature Conservancy?
No, I'm not.
So it's down by McBain, like the big McBain oak. Uh-huh. It's on the property Catfish Katie's used to be on. Sure. 160 acres. There's a lot of different kind of edible riparian buffer plantings right on the Missouri River. And then on the other side of the levee, there's pecan and black walnut planted in like an alley cropping fashion to demonstrate it. In one corner, like the most upland, highest elevation corner of that, we are going to be putting in a hazelnut trial kind of for this purpose. Mm-hmm. So,
again, it was in a bottom, but it was a well-drained bottom.
Right.
Piece of the bottom. Sure. Right. Okay. So let's say I got my area picked out. It's going to be well-drained. I got 20, 25 inches of good topsoil before I hit a restrictive. Now what I do? Plant them and forget about them?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. I like that.
Yeah, these
count my money in 7
These
years.
are so low input. Pay for the tree and then come back 10 years later and harvest your crop.
That's right.
Just kidding. Well, you got to look at land use history. At least that's what we do here. If it was row cropped and had heavy equipment for a long period of time, you might want to look at the soil organic matter compaction. You might subsurface rip on a grid to create more volume for nice tree root growth. Do some tilling along the strips of trees that you're going to plant. Maybe even a cover crop in the 6 or 12 months leading up to it to just get organic matter back up.
Manures too?
We generally don't do that out at Harf. And we even, in most cases, unless there's like a particular fertility issue that is a shortcoming, we don't fertilize with nitrogen in the year of establishment. Sure. We don't want to get long spindly plants. Typically in the second year, we'll start to apply urea. But that's at least in our neck of the woods, the answer to part 2. If Tom wants to add anything, yeah.
Ours is similar. One of the things is, getting your soil tested is one of the precursors to doing this, to look at those parameters. We do like to try to boost the pH up closer to over 6, close to 6.5 would be pretty ideal for hazelnut.
That's water pH. Missouri is one of these states that we talk about salt pH, which is a half a point lower than water pH. Huh.
So around 6.5. So some of our soils here in New Jersey could be quite acidic, 5.0, something like that. So you can grow hazelnuts. They will live in those low pH soils, but you're going to be stunting their growth or their productivity, especially over time. So we like to get our growers to do the soil test, and then if it's appropriate to do the liming, that would be the time, and try to incorporate it into the soil. And then the next is really, once you're satisfied with the soils, we move on to what are you going to grow. And we're in different phases. So here in New Jersey, where we've selected the plants in the Mid-Atlantic region, the ones that have come out of the Rutgers program, at least, they're somewhat locally adapted. We have confidence across the growing zones in New Jersey, if the soils are appropriate, that the plants will do well. Where Missouri is new, historically we couldn't really grow hazelnuts because of eastern filbert blight. So a lot of this is brand new. There's some history of hazelnuts, European hazelnuts in Missouri, but it's relatively limited and wasn't very long term because mostly related probably to eastern filbert blight. Ron could comment on that.
Eastern filbert blight.
Okay.
And it's a fungal pathogen that is endemic, and the native host is the American hazelnut. The European hazelnut, while there are sources of resistance within it, which communities come to realize after a lot of heavy long-term screening efforts at Rutgers and Oregon State, generally the European hazelnut is susceptible. So the bottleneck of material that could potentially get imported and trialed here to see if it is adaptive to the climate is tight because of that.
Are most of the ones that you're looking at have some tolerance to it?
Yep, populations that have been sent to us, so progeny, seedlings, they're usually segregating for it for one or more sources of resistance. So there are some pyramiding efforts for long-term durability. But the selections that have been sent for replicated trials as candidate cultivar releases typically have a source or one or more sources. Yeah.
And we can get these plants from where?
There's a few nurseries. So in Missouri, we're trialing in new plant materials, including the recent releases from Rutgers University. So our recommendations at this stage, if you want to be an early adopter, is plant the production cultivars being recommended from Rutgers University, with maybe some tweaks to the pollinizers, because the most cold sensitive part of the hazelnut plant is going to be the catkins, the male flowers after elongation. The vegetative parts of the plant are pretty much okay here. So the question, that's context. The answer to your question is the licensed nurseries of Rutgers University.
Okay.
So Tom could talk about those.
And I will add that there's a few other sources of hazelnuts that come from nurseries in New York State and also in Ontario, close to Niagara Falls, where they do have eastern filbert blight resistant material. And maybe we'll get a chance to talk about it, but some of the efforts have included crossing our native hazelnut with the European hazelnut to develop what we call hybrid hazelnuts. And those are showing more cold tolerance as well as disease resistance. But the challenge is bringing in the native hazelnut brings in the kind of reduced nut quality or kernel traits that are more like a wild plant. So that's taken a longer time with breeding and selection. And that's really the stage we're at now. One of the stages is trying to really find some hybrid hazelnuts that should have wider adaptation, that also have really good kernel quality traits that match the European.
Yeah, and working with a perennial crop that takes 7 or 8 years to make nuts, it takes a while, doesn't it, to get these?
Yeah, and you want to make sure that the source of resistance that you have is durable, stays intact over the lifespan of the tree.
It's just gonna take some time. So okay, I got my cultivars. I'm getting 3 or 4 different ones at least.
So right now there's 2 predominant production cultivars Tom recommends from his releases. There's some increasing tendency to lean towards one. So Revord is that one. The secondary one is Somerset. And then there's a handful of pollinizers I'll let Tom rattle off, along with a second wave of releases that is in process, I believe.
In process for next year. So right now we released a cultivar named Monmouth as one of the early blooming pollinizers. And we have one that was developed by the Hybrid Hazelnut Consortium called the Beast. Its formal name is OSU 541147, but it's the Beast Hazelnut.
The Beast.
Which does contain some native hazelnut in its genetic background and a different source of resistance to eastern filbert blight. And it actually, the timing is just right, and the incompatibility alleles are just right, so it works quite well with Raritan, with Somerset, with Monmouth. So we're recommending the Beast as one of the pollinizers. And then there's a few others. What we basically do is recommend growers try to diversify their orchards with some of the cultivars coming from Z's Nutty Nursery and also Grimo Nut Nursery in Oregon. And they each have multiple cultivars where they know their incompatibility alleles. And especially as we're going into the potentially colder regions or more stressful climates like Missouri, we push towards diversifying the orchard to make sure that you'll have a good pollen cloud. And Ron mentioned we have some new cultivars coming out from Rutgers, which will be early next year when we make those, or at least publicly announce those. And the reason for those coming out so soon is to to diversify the pollinizers in the orchard, because that's really one of our biggest limiting factors. Beyond eastern filbert blight, which is probably always going to be there as a challenge, for breeding and for managing orchards, but then having a really robust pollen cloud. So we need a wider diversity of cultivars to sort of fill that gap.
And I should add here that we have support from USDA's AFRI to help with replicated trials to release additional pollinizers foremost. So some of those might be hybrid pollinizers over the next few years, but the pollinizers that Tom's referring to for next year's release, I believe, are predominantly Avellana, right?
They are all European, pure European. The reason being they have the highest quality nuts and the highest yields. Once we go into making these interspecific hybrids, we see the quality of the nuts reduce in general, and then even the yields a bit. We're working on that with breeding. We have some really exciting new stuff in the pipeline, but what would be available to growers isn't at the highest level.
Tom mentioned, I'll just emphasize, there are some really exciting F2, so like it's pseudo F2 for row crops.
After you make a cross.
Second generation. So it's they're not crossed among siblings, but it's sort of like complementary outcrossing, complementary, like referring to like the phenotypic sort of complementarity of the look of both plants and the traits they have, wanting to recombine those and get them into a single individual. But there are some F2s, so 2 generations from the first hybridization between European and American that are starting to resemble the kernel characteristics, very representative of like a confectionery European hazelnut.
But still has those native genes in them for diseases and such.
Yeah, so there might be, we have to screen them thoroughly. Might be some quantitative or more durable resistance to eastern filbert blight. There might be more climactic resilience in those plants coming from a wild native species. So there is a promising outlook for that track, but those aren't necessarily, in the very late stage of the release pipeline.
So on these pollinators, they still produce nuts, right?
Yep.
So what's the ratio that I want of these maybe two or three varieties versus some pollinators scattered up?
So,
these are Tom's cultivars, so I'll let him.
All right.
What we're recommending to our growers, I'll say, is Raritan can be about 50 to 60% of your orchard. So that means about 40% of your orchard should be made up of other cultivars or pollinizers. Now there could be a higher percentage of something like Monmouth or Somerset, but I think we're still looking at about 30% of the orchard should be interpollinizing, or we'll call them pollinizer cultivars or pollen sources. But that doesn't mean that they're not a beneficial contributor in terms of nut yield and nut quality. So we're releasing additional plants from Rutgers, but we've made sure that the nut quality, kernel quality, is right on par with something like Raritan, so you can harvest them together and you can process them, and you're not going to really have any like limitations. But we do need to add that diversity to make sure we have a robust pollen cloud. Because that really, if you're relying on too few pollinizers in your orchard, or we'll say just a limited diversity of cultivars, even if they are compatible, if you have a strange frost event or a weird, very extended warm spell followed by cold, you may just have mismatching of bloom timing, and that could reduce your yields very significantly. So we're trying to go with diversity. And the last point on the diversity side, that also refers to sources of resistance to eastern filbert blight. We're trying to avoid a monoculture of resistance. That way it takes the pressure off of the fungus to mutate, but then also enhances the pollen cloud. So we're trying to tackle or address 2 different sides of our challenges at once.
All right. So let's get down to brass tacks. What's my row spacing between rows and between plants?
So some of the plants have different canopy morphologies. So tightness of the branches and overall size. Raritan is a much bigger plant than Somerset. Those are 2 production cultivars we've mentioned here. I believe our production orchard, Tom, for demonstration and some fertility response curve research, I believe that was 18 feet between rows and in row. But maybe we stretched that out, expanded that a little bit more because of the size of Raritan and prioritizing Raritan.
We've been currently recommending 18 feet between rows. 20 feet is fine too, but we've realized that 18 feet is, it seems to be very sufficient even if you go to like the 20-year mark. The interesting thing about Raritan, it's a very large tree, but it has a very narrow canopy. So it grows large and upright, but it's not as wide as, say Monmouth, for example. And what we've been recommending is 10 feet in the row for the trees, which, though, once you get to 12 years to 15 years, may require you to eliminate every other tree in the row. So we're planting a double density to maximize early yields per acre. And then as we get to maturity, when the trees start to compete, then we would go through a phase of sequential pruning or, reducing tree canopy size on those temporary trees and then removing trees eventually at maybe 15 years.
We're kind of like other trees too. You go twice as thick, knowing that you're going to lose some, and also thinning.
Yeah, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, but some of that will depend on some management questions you're going to choose. So if somebody chooses to like more of a high fertility input set of conditions or like micro emitter sprinklers, that might get weighed against the in-row double density because growth might be that much more vigorous. You might get to touching trees earlier. I think that is some of the logic that's come out of Oregon State in recent years. But
in Oregon, they're seeing that. I'm not sure how that's going to unfold here. There's really a significant impact over the probably years 5, 6, and 7 or 8 when you have twice as many trees and they're starting to yield 10 pounds. But we're also finding, or at least from Oregon, a lot of the growers do not want to remove those trees that they've taken care of for 10 plus years. So it's a debate that's going to continue, I'm sure. We're still advocating double density because we think that we could really make up some of that difference. And then the approach that we've taken with talking with our growers is you don't just flip a switch and cut out 50% of your trees and lose half your yield that one year. You can actually go over multiple years once you identify your permanent trees and your temporary trees and start to reduce the canopy, even maybe by 1/3 on those temporary trees. And you do that over multiple years. And this, of course, works if you have 5 acres or 10 acres, not 500 acres. But our growers have smaller plots. If you can do this sort of weaning from your permanent trees to removing your temporary trees, your yields will continue to stay somewhat buffered, and you may be able to get to the point where you don't see a drastic drop. But of course, it's going to take the inputs of managing your trees. But that puts them at ease a little bit when we talk about it that way.
It's more management compatible, but also these kind of decisions to prolong the thinning gradually can have really major impacts on the enterprise sheet and making the early decade or 12 years, what have you, much more appealing for some of these crops and recovering investment costs. We're looking at a lot of similar questions with chestnut and like the precocious high fecundity, so early bearing individuals.
So go ahead and plant them that twice as thick, and then after, so you can help cover your
the ROI year, the break even year, starts to come down quite a bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And yearly fertilization in NPK.
So at HARF, our general fertility input is 100 pounds of urea across the calendar year. Usually that's 2 installments.
Of N or urea?
Of actual N.
Okay, 100 pounds of actual N.
So we know that we should be doing some fertility research, though. That is just generic across all our tree nuts. So we're implementing response curves with like a 0 treatment and then 4 different tiers up to 180 pounds. And a lot of that is inspired through some observational work Tom and his farm manager have been doing at Rutgers.
Right. Yeah. But you're really not going to get anything of it until your 8th year, probably, yield-wise.
Well, so Tom was saying a little bit otherwise here. He gave like the 10 pounds a tree is where you hit like a noticeable mature yield. But if you have 250 trees per acre, even at 5 pounds, if you have a 10-acre orchard, now you're starting to talk about 10 to 12,000 pounds of production from your small farm operation. That's not negligible. In the
early years.
Yeah.
3 and 4 and 5 and 6.
So you'll get first flowering on a hazelnut in year 3.
Okay.
So there will be nuts produced in those early years. Where you start to call it commercial, I think, that's something Tom would comment on.
We're seeing quite a difference across farmers or farms, where some have 5-year-old trees that are just now starting to make 1 or 2 pounds, where others that maybe they got the inputs just right, or they started with older trees, start to get 1 or 2 pounds at like 3 years. And there's kind of a point where it's worth it to pick those nuts versus not worth it also. So that, we don't have all the economics worked out. If it's a small plot and you're going to go out there and pick each tree by hand, and you're going to spend many days but get 300 pounds of nuts that you're very proud of, then that's fine. But if it's a more commercial operation, it doesn't pay to take your machines out to try to harvest that.
So another thing that came to mind was the other end of the spectrum in the conversation is, and going back to the first half of the podcast, Tom, you mentioned that Revord was producing 50 to 70 pounds as you got to year like 18 to 20, and that what I gathered from a recent point you made was that tree hasn't necessarily been thinned from its 18 by 18 spacing yet at that point. You could still keep 18 by 18 would be what, like 125 trees an acre, and you're producing 50 pounds or there. That's quite a yield.
In New Jersey, at least. So part of my curiosity with hazelnuts over the past 20 years is traveling the world to look at growth rates and yields, because I've always been looking at our trees here in New Jersey and saying, well, how do we compare? Can we hit those high yields that you would see in the Willamette Valley, or you can see in some of the most fertile soils in Italy? And we're seeing that we can. Now, under New Jersey conditions, with the right cultivars, especially as Ron's mentioning, at maturity, when you have just a little over 100 trees per acre, we're routinely seeing, and this is across multiple cultivars, that at the 18 plus year mark, you're getting 45 to 50 pounds of nuts, dried nuts per tree. So then you're looking at over 4,000 pounds of nuts per acre. And if you look at world averages, that's almost double world averages. But if you look at extremes, especially in Oregon, it's really close. So you can have those really high yields in Oregon on occasion. And we're seeing that we can have similar yields here under New Jersey conditions. So we're excited over that potential. And
sure. It's very exciting new crop, that we have. But we're about out of time now. But information, if people want to know more information, say Tom has some.
Tom has some extension resources. I'm not sure if they're in a public forum yet at this point. They've been disseminated through a newsletter that he runs, but his email address can get you added to that.
We do have one. We have one extension bulletin that describes cultivar selection for New Jersey, which goes into some of the background information I think could be a good starting point. And then we do, as Ron mentioned, we do have other extension resources that we're working on getting out into a more public forum, but we're happy to work with any growers who are interested and have questions.
And then go to the Center of Agroforestry's website eventually and get some good data from that too.
So there's 2 sources for information if you're in the Missouri neck of the woods. We have hazelnut at missouri.edu. If you have specific questions related to how might I consider adopting hazelnut. And we have a a new consortium website that is in the early stages of development in support from this USDA AFRI grant that I mentioned earlier in the conversation. So at some point over the next 18 months, there'll be a hybrid hazelnut consortium website that I anticipate being published, which will be more of like a nice clearinghouse or common source for information across institutions.
Well, this is all the time we had thank you, Ron and Tom. This has been fantastic. Some really brand new information here on hazelnut and really exciting. And so this is it for Tim's Take, and tune in next time when we have another great discussion. All right, we'll see you.
Thank you.